Gute Woche, and welcome everyone who's joined in. This week's shiur is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Arya Freeman in honor of the forthcoming wedding of their granddaughter Shani. That's Menachem's daughter. They live in New York. She's getting married to Shlomo Laskar this coming Wednesday. And Arya and his wife are not able to travel because of the current restrictions. So I wish them lots of nachas and good health for many years to come. Right, so let's go to our first question, which we have on the list. Okay, so the first question is revisiting a point which we had in the previous shiur. And that was that I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about not only does the presence of Baalei Simcha, Baalei Bris, exempt for Tachnun, but also the Shul where the Bris will take place, even if there's no Baalei Bris present, there's also cause for omitting Tachnun. So I received a letter from one of our regular listeners, I believe he's online today also, that he was at a certain shul where looks like the rabbi wasn't aware of this psak, that because it's a shul where the bris will take place, therefore Tachnun is not said. So he's asking, is it a Chabad thing or is it unanimous? So what you have in front of you is a quote from the Mishnah Brura. And this is in Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph. That's where it talks all about Tachnun. And it's the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch is Bebeis HaKnesses Sheyesh Bei Mila. That's on the previous page. That's what Mishnah Brura is quoting. So Mishnah Brura to me is like pretty like standard Weltische minhag. And that's the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch is Bebeis HaKnesses Sheyesh Bei Mila. So, in a shul where subsequently the bris will take place, even if the, I don't know what the word celebrant means exactly in English, even if the Baalei Bris are not there, still, since that's the shul where the bris will take place, therefore there's an exemption of Tachnun. Then he says, although the Shulchan Aruch only talks about the house, the shul where the bris is going to take place, the Achroinim add, even if it's not the shul where it's going to take place, but the celebrants are there, that's also a reason for exemption of Tachnun. So it's actually the other way around. The Beis HaKnesses Sheyesh Bei Mila is the primary exemption for Tachnun, and the secondary chidush is that even if it's not in the shul where the bris is going to take place, because the Baalei Bris are present, there's a reason for not saying Tachnun. Okay, let's go on to the next point. And now this is, I found it amusing, but it's like actually a fascinating shiur. So the story is that it happened in Eretz Yisrael, in some kibbutz or whatever, and the shliach there sent me the question, asked me, the story is that Reuven visits Shimon. And so Reuven comes along and he has his iPhone, whatever, and he's visiting Shimon's house. And I guess he may have put his phone on the table. Meanwhile, the dog, Shimon's dog, thought the phone was a bone, but it's in Israel. Bones and phones don't rhyme in Ivrit. At any rate, he decided it's going to be a geschmacke thing to digest, and so he chewed the phone. And now this expensive iPhone, whatever it is, now has lost a lot of value. And Reuven, the guest, is turning to his gracious host that he should reimburse him for the cost of his.
Him and the guest.
Well, it doesn't matter. The guest who the Baal HaPhone is asking for the Baal HaDog to reimburse for the damage to the phone. Now, I first thought the guy was joking, but it can be a serious thing, yeah. It's a
The
serious.
Gemara comment about it.
Oh, here we go. That's exactly. So you've got everyone who's learned a bit of Mishnayos Babakama knows you got Arba, obviously Zikin, and you have Hashoir, Haboir, Hamaver, Hahever, and you have Keren, Shein, and Regel. Now, Regel is the damage caused by an animal who's just going on his merry way and he tramples on things indiscriminately. That's called Regel. Then we have Shen, which the animal eats things. He sees some Geschmack he eats it. Then we have the third level is Keren. That's when the animal is wild and starts goring. And so now we have the difference is that Shen V'Regel, the liability is to pay the full damage. By contrast, by Keren, the liability is only chatzi nezek, only have to pay half the damage. And also it starts applying chutzlars because it's a form of knas. At any rate, Keren is much more lenient. So now, I remember in camp, there was this song about a goat which ate some shirts right off the line. This Harlem goat. Yeah, so I see some nodding faces. Okay. So what's the din if a goat eats a shirt? So the halacha is that is called keren and not shen, even though obviously it chewed it with its teeth. So here we have the Shulchan Aruch. This is Siman Shin Tzadik Aleph in Chesed Mishpat. So we have here Bamed Dvarim Amurim. When does shen apply? She'ochlo dover horoilo. When the animal ate something which is a normal thing for animals to eat. But if the animal ate something which is not suitable for animals to eat, Keilim, like garments or other utensil, furniture, shinuyhu, this is an abnormal behavior. And the liability is only chatzi nezek. Only half the damage. Whether this happened in the premises of the victim, in other words, the animal had gone into someone else's premises and had chewed up shirts off the line, chatzi nezek. And then even if it wasn't Rosh Hashanah, no difference. No. So this is, first of all, animals chewing iPhones is certainly not a normal behavior. I must share with you the word which I heard that once there was a fellow who woke up one morning and he's feeling really angry with Yiddishkeit. I'm going to eat treif. Today I'm going to eat treif. And he's thinking, I'm going to eat treif. And in Yiddish house, where did he find treif? So always his mother told him, be careful with the candles because the animals, they used to have wax candles. Don't drip them on the dishes because they're treif. I'm going to eat treif. So he goes to the cupboard and goes and chaps a candle, a bis, bites into the candle, and he chews the candle. I say, if this is treif, what is? I'm not interested. Go upon him. So the dog mistame will not become a muad in eating phones. The violet was chatzi nezek. Then the next point is that it didn't happen in the premises of the victim. It happened in the premises of the so-called mazik, the so-called the one who was responsible for the damage, as if to say, listen, I came to visit you. Why didn't you look after your dog that you didn't chew up my phone? So here we have another place, also in Chesed Mishpat, in Siman Shin Tzadik Ches. Now here's a story where I come to visit with my animal, and my animal caused damage to your premises. Potter Baal HaShoir. So I'm visiting with my ox to your, and I call it caused damage. Potter. Im Hizik Baal HaShoir. Shoir Baal HaChotzer LeShoir HaNichnas. If the local ox victimized the visiting ox, Potter. Let's try to give an example. So what the Mechaber is saying is that if the victim ox was the visitor and the local ox was the perpetrator, so the owner of the property can say, listen, I let you come in with your ox. I never took responsibility to protect to protect your property in my premises. Contrary to perhaps in civil law, English law, on anything which happens on your premises, you may be liable, and that's why I always put this insurance, these announcements, these notices. Anyone who parks here is at their own risk, etc. Because in civil law, there seems to be a certain achrayus. Someone comes in your premises, you have an achrayus for their welfare. But in halacha there isn't this apparently, and that's the akolpon. That's the shita of the mechaber. I let you come in with your animal, whatever. But I did not take responsibility to look after your animal for its welfare. Then there's the Ramo, and he says the kiven shenosan lo yirshus likonis. When the host allows the visitor to come in, habi ki'ilu kibel alav shmirase. It's as if he took on responsibility to also take care of the welfare of his visitor and his visitor's property, etc. So we have here machlokas mechaber Ramo, whether the home owner has a liability for damages to the visitor. So this is machlokas. All right. So therefore, coming back to the phone. So according to the mechaber, for sure he doesn't have to pay because he didn't take achrayus, even though it was the owner's dog which chewed up the phone. But he doesn't have to pay because he didn't take on shemira for the phone. According to the Ramo, having said that, so then what happens now? What happens now is we've got this approach in. There is an expression in English of ownership is 90% of the law. The halocha, lahavdil, the equivalent is which means the money is in my pocket. For you to get the money out of my pocket, you're going to have to prove that I'm liable. So now the homeowner, he's got 100 shekels or 1,000 shekels in his pocket. The phone owner wants from him the money. So he says, listen, you're going to have to prove that halacha is like the Ramo, not like the mechaber. Until then, the money stays in my pocket. So that's the basically going to remain. And the term for this in halacha language is kimli. Kimli is not just a Chinese name and family name. Kimli, Kim Shoyin and Kim Du, a whole family of Chinese. But it's Kimli means I hold like. Kimli Kiploini. I have the prerogative to say I hold like this one, and therefore I don't have to pay. So therefore, basically the halacha remains as far as I can see. And not, in Choshen Mishpat you have to hear both sides, but I can advise at least. I'm allowed to advise the one who asks me what are your rights, and what I'm seeing here that the owner of the house and the owner of the dog he does not, as far as I can see, does not have to pay for the digested phone. Okay, let's move on.
In Chad Gadya, the dog is killed because he ate the goat.
He's smitten, no? Mit dem Stecken.
Oh yeah, okay. So who's killed? Oh, the ox is killed.
Solange nicht gesagt, kein Chad Gadya kennt ich. Okay.
Shakers, du sagst Chad Gadya?
Right. In a public forum, you have to be careful.
I apologize.
Right. Someone's asking, why don't we Poskim like the Ramo? So as far as I know, in the rules of Kimli, even between Mechaber and Ramo, you can take you have the prerogative to say Kimli Mechaber. There's a whole section in Halacha called Kloli Kimli, which kind of, can you take some, way out opinion and say Kimli is like some unknown opinion? Or it has to be something more, from the more well-known opinions. Okay, let's move on. We're looking at a very serious situation with the parsha, with the people with the lockdowns and etc. And tears and people are asking that the likelihood is that for Purim, then likely many people will not be able to come to Shul as they would normally. And what are the solutions? I think we discussed this last week, but I tried to find a way of being matir, to be machshir, a Megillah printed in English, but it doesn't seem to work. But meanwhile, so it doesn't work la halacha. So here we have: is there a value of people being advised to read the Megillah from a printed Megillah? So now here we have a lashon the mechaber in Tafresh Tzadik Aleph Siftes im ein Megillah ksheira, and no. If the people used to have, they lived in small villages, etc., could be they didn't have a Megillah. So says the Mechaber, koirim oisa bechumash beloi bracha. It should be read from a chumash without a bracha. Now, of course, now we think of a chumash, we think of one of those printed books which are bound with a spine, etc. That's not so evident. When they said chumash, that's what they mean. And so now we've got the Mishnah Berurah here, which is quoting from the Magen Avraham. That which it says in the Shulchan Aruch, that you can read it from a chumash, but dafka bechumash also hachumash beglila, k'meshakosov b'simen kuf mem gimel. It means a chumash made in a scroll. Mishum sheyesh omrim sheyotze b'zeh b'shas adchak. It's in a scroll together with other parts of Tanakh, and for some reason it's not written well enough to be kosher as a Megillah, and that's what it means. Read it from a chumash, which means not a proper. It's the kind of thing they would use in a cheder back then.
Written, not printed.
Yeah.
Written.
Yes, it was
talking about on parchment.
Probably on parchment. The Magen Avraham, the Bach Magen Avraham, 400 years ago, they're saying our chumashim, which are printed and they are bound, not in scrolls. They mention he's not dealing with the parchment or paper. He's addressing that if it's not in a roll, then it's not valid, and there's no purpose even for reading it beyochid when you don't have Megillah. However, Magen Avraham having said that, however, the Pri Megadim says that you should read even from a chumash, as in a printed chumash, so that shouldn't be forgotten, shouldn't be, it can be a person who lives for years in a place. And so we say it comes from Purim, you don't have Megillah, but read the Megillah from a chumash or from from a printed text. And in this Shaloi Tishtachach, and in this, my understanding is verkehrt. Excuse me. It's better for people, if they don't understand Hebrew, it would be better that they actually read it in their own language rather than reading it in Hebrew, which they don't understand. Since the idea is to remember, so better they should read a Megillah which they can understand than to read a Megillah which they don't understand.
Dayan, indeed. So I read somewhere this year, just in case some people, Chas v'Shalom, won't be able to hear the Megillah, that to hear it through Zoom might be also acceptable. Not ideal, but acceptable.
I think that would be also just as the same as reading from a printed chumash. In other words, yeah.
It's the same level.
Actually, just now that you mentioned,
Just
can I just mention?
If you don't mind, try to keep to the chat with the print rather than. But go ahead, Reb Naftali.
I just want to mention further what he was saying. I'm mamish thinking about it today. If you're listening to on Zoom and you're actually following with a kosher Megillah, that shouldn't be a problem, should it?
No, not at all. That's fine. That's fine. Let's move on. The next thing we have on my list is something which you might find a bit perhaps amusing, but I got actually from a very serious person. This question is, which bracha, or any bracha, should I say upon receiving the vaccine? So some people thought it was a bit of a joke, and especially with the predictable, naysayers about the vaccine. So of course, then that's not so serious. But this person is a person I respect greatly, and he asked me, and I believe he was asking a serious question. I'm talking about the person who's well over 80, And probably, I assume he had been, and I responded to him that if you've been under house arrest for 8 months and now you feel free to go out, so then it's like a birchas hagoimel, a matir asurim. But this I said, I felt that you could say the brocha birchas hagoimel. There's one thing is having, got. There's no birchas anen. There's a brocha before you eat a food, you make a brocha. Here it's more a brocha of thanksgiving, of having lived through an ordeal, and Baruch Hashem have overcome and managed to go further in life. So I felt that if Itaka had been so isolated and so fearful, and now he's feeling the tranquility to be able to go out, so I can see the value, I can see the justification to say a birchas hagoyim. But again, if that's quite personal, I don't think there is an expression in El Yorabo that there's no such thing as a shechionu b'levatola. If you feel a freiligkeit, a simcha about something, and you say shechionu, it's not about Torah. But I must share with you one more thing, because it's Motzei Shabbos, I like to tell stories. So my father, Olav Shalom, those who knew him will appreciate this. My father, Olav Shalom, told a story about someone who asked the Rov that he'd just seen the laundry woman had his trousers were on the washing line. And in the olden days, they had this beater, and she was beating the trousers. And he asked, do I have to bench goimel because of the way she was beating my trousers? She said, what's the shaila? I mean, the trousers. Stell dich vor, wenn ich wohl gewesen in die Hosen. Imagine if I had been inside the trousers. So, if a person taka feels that I think there is value to it. That if a person taka feels that he was so suppressed and now he feels a release, I think that he could say a bracha berachas hagoyim, and I don't think it's a bracha lebatol. Let's move on. Okay, here is
Speak a little bit louder.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, okay, thank you. Please use the chat, which I'm keeping an eye on. Thank you. Right. The next question here is a serious question. Someone who lives here in the UK, his parents live somewhere in the States. They're getting on in life, quite old, and they have a home help, a non-Jewish maid who comes in and does the housekeeper, whatever you call it. And at first, the mother would light the fire, and then the maid would cook. By this point, she's so frail that she's not able to light the fire. The next thing is, the fellow who's here in the UK, he says, if I visit my parents, will I be able to use the Keilim without having to kasher them? So I'm not dealing with whether the parents should be using the Goyishem maid. That's one issue. They've got a need. I'm dealing more with the question about whether one would be able to use the Keilim. So here we have in the Halochos of Bishul Akum on Yeredeya Simen Kuf Yud Gimel. So we have two seifim which are relevant to our conversation. Yesh mi shematir b'shvochis shelonu, v'yesh mi she'oiser v'afilu b'diyabed. There are those who say if we have a maid in the house who cooks, so Bishul Akum could mean an outside goy, but if a maid in your house cooks for you, there are those who say that's not called Bishul Akum because it's one of the domestic help. There are those who say no, it's not. It's called Bishul Akum even b'diavad. Says the Ramo, b'diavad yeslis mechal divrei hamatirin. B'diavad, you can rely on the lenient position that an in-house maid is not called Bishul Akum. Even lechatchila, it's customary to rely on this. Even lechatchila, it's common that they would rely on the non-Jewish maids who are servants cooking in the Jewish house. Inevitably, someone of the Bnei Abayis who are Yidden who have gone and tampered with the fire. Now, I must say that this second point, which the Ramos says, doesn't really apply. More like the olden days, you had a a wooden fire, a coal fire, and every few minutes you had to come and poke the fire, then you're saying, all right, so inevitably a Yid had come into the kitchen, to just to see that everything's cooking okay, to make sure and to sample a little bit of the kugel. So meanwhile, they had to give a poke. It's called Bisha Yisrael. A Yid had been involved. That is not true with our electrical or gas fire. We don't, you come into the kitchen, you don't touch the knobs. So that doesn't, but the B'di'eved, the Ramo has already said that the mere fact that it wasn't an outside goy, it was a goy who was, don't forget, that the reason for Bishul Akum is Mipnei Chasnus, because of Kiruv. So you have a friend, a goy who comes in and brings you some kind of food which they cooked. I can understand that there's a certain Kiruv here. But here we're talking about a maid, come on. The fellow's working for you. I don't know how much you pay them for their hour. You pay them the minimum wage. There's no kiruv there. They're just doing, they're slogging away for you in your house. In Megila, it's not really a question of kiruv. That's the svara of the Keilim. So, all right. So we have here, lechatchila, we wouldn't rely on it. Certainly we have a b'di'eved that you can rely on it. Now, so therefore, for the parents themselves, and B'shas, B'chlal, there's a rule. B'shas Chak is the same approach as B'di'eved. So if they are in a position that they don't have any Yid to come and light the fire on a regular basis, they could rely on an in-house carer. They could rely that that's not called Bishul Akum. Next question is, what about the son? Now, that's the second quote here. Since Bishul Akum has got to do with Kirva, the question is, do you have to cash a Keilim from Bishul Akum? So here we have Machlokas, the Rashba and the Reuven. Rabbi Aaron Halevi was a contemporary of the Rashba. They corresponded a bit. And the Reuven he says, Bishul Akum applies to the food, but not to the taste, which is absorbed in the Keilim. No one's going to become your friend because they tasted, some of the residue inside your frying pan. Come on. But the Rashba says, no. Since it becomes almost like an isucheftze, therefore, even the taste which is absorbed in the Keilim, you have to kasher. So we paskin like the Rashba that you have to kasher for Bishul Akum. But you've got here the Re'ah, and so therefore we have in a tziruf, we'll kind of look at for Ashton's, that which the goy cooked is with the is kosher in any case. Now the son is visiting, is asking him inside the Keilim. Really, you got the svara of the Re'ah, so you can be mitzarev that he's allowed to use the Keilim and doesn't have to worry about it. So this is like several tzdodim to be made. Someone's asking, is Hagoyim the same as the Shechianu? I wouldn't say it's totally the same, but I think it's a similar. There can be a similar thing. If a person taka feels indebted, he wants to express his gratitude. So I don't think there's a labatolo there. Someone's asking, can you ask a goy to do a malocha for a choyle? Now, this is an important point. If a goy comes to do, let's say you have someone who's ill on Shabbos, and you called in a goy and he made a steak, he fried an egg. So then the patient is allowed to eat it. But after Shabbos, you're going to have to kasher the frying pan from Bishul Akum. So it's mutter at the moment, but there's still a need to kasher. I'm not sure about Chol of Akum's, the halachic is that Chol of Akum would have to kasher the Keilim. So that you don't have the heter of the Re'ah for Chol of Akum. Let's move on. Okay. Before going to this, about the bird cage, someone sent me a question. They heard that it's a minhag not to fry or not to cook or fry kashet liver. Is that right? And the answer is yes. And this is perhaps not so well known, but I for years I've heard about this. And then later I saw it. There's a sefer published of the anecdotes from the late Rav Wolf Greenglass. So it's a 700 pages, I think. And just now it's been released in English. Although I haven't seen the English volume, so I don't know whether this point is mentioned there. He has a list of various chumras which are commonly accepted amongst Anash, and one of them is about liver. Liver is, after all, saturated with blood. So we have a seder of how to kasher liver, and that is by roasting it. And the assumption is that after X amount of time, there's no blood left. And yet there's when cooking is the difference between roasting and cooking. Cooking is that there's a liquid where it can the taste can go out and come back in again. And so as a result, there seems to be a Kabbalah amongst Anash that one doesn't fry or cook liver even after it's been kashered, because I guess it's a lack of total confidence that all the blood has been totally extracted. And let me just explain something. Are you allowed to eat blood or not allowed to eat blood? There's hundreds of times, I mean, many times it says in the Torah, you're not allowed to eat blood. But there's a concept of, if you eat a piece of raw meat, you wouldn't need to you don't have to salt meat if it's raw. I got blood. The blood is only osur, is dam shapirish, if the blood has gone out. So if a raw piece of meat hasn't been salted and you eat it raw, then it doesn't matter if there's blood inside. But if you cook it, so then the blood goes out and then comes in again. That's dam shapirish. That's why it's so important to kasher the meat before cooking. So now with the liver, if it hasn't been cooked, it's just the roast liver, there's no problem. Even if there may be a bit of blood inside, it doesn't matter because it's not dam shapirish. But if you cook it, if there was any blood left there, it's dam shapirish. And so la halacha, certainly that's not the case. The halacha is once it's cooked and it's all turned brown, etc., there's no blood left there. But there's this chumrah which is accepted amongst Anash, although as I say, apparently it's not so well known, but that of not frying or cooking kashered liver. Okay. Let's now go on to the next thing about closing a bird cage on Shabbos. So how does this come up? Someone sent me an article to check through, and it was on Chabad.org. They've got a whole series on the Lamates Malachas. And as they're going through, and they're very careful about this, that anything which is halacha, which is published, has to be vetted by one or two rabbonim. And the Rebbe was very emphatic that things which are published have to be checked by outside parties. And so that little bit there, Lamates Malachas, I'm looking through. That's why it came up, this business about a bird cage. So here at the bottom, we have here a quote. This is from the Bir Halocho of the Mishnah Berurah. And the Mishnah Berurah is where this worry comes up from. So looking over here, that's the bottom of the page. He says, Kluv is a cage. Even if the birds were in the cage and the cage was opened, you should be careful not to close the gate of the cage, because you are intending to trap, to hold back the birds from running away, from flying out. Sefer Avram is like a malakit. I think his name is Al-Kalai. And he's quoting the Machzik Brocho, which is the Chido. Now we're not talking about budgies or parrots. We're talking about chickens, hens. He says to open and close a chicken coop on Shabbos is also. You can have, the chickens have to be fed. You'll give a goy to feed them. If the goy then closes the gate of the pen of the chicken coop, less long, but don't worry. So you have here a grace chumrah. You got here a chicken cage or a bird cage, and to open the door and close it, he says it's an inyan of your trapping. Now, when I saw this, I was surprised. And I'm looking here now. This is in Shimon Shin Tes Vov, I think. Shin Tes Zayin, sorry, yeah? With Dinim of Tzeido. So let's read the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe on the same place, same area. Domestic birds. The chickens, or whatever, they come, pigeons, whatever, domestic birds, which come into the cage in the evening, it's easy to catch hold of them. It's not normal for them to wriggle away and to run away. A chicken, a domestic chicken, is not called a creature which you have to catch. Because in the evening they're going to come home in any case. So it looks like he's saying even to pick up a chicken in the farmyard is also not called Seder because it's a domestic bird. It's going to come in the evening. I'm going to say a word from the Frierdiker Rebbe in a moment, but soon. But to go and seize a chicken in the farmyard, running around the farmyard, you're not allowed to. Midrabanon. So if you have a domestic chicken running around in the farmyard, even though it's domestic in the evening and it's going to come home in any case, but now it's running around. Midrabanon, you shouldn't chase it to a place where it should be easy to catch because that midrabanon is called trapping. Then there's issue of muksa. Okay. But what we're seeing here is, and you look in the Alter Rebbe, you can look it back inside and more carefully. The Alter Rebbe seems to be saying that trapping means that you have to use some kind of ingenuity, some kind of chasing after the something. But if it's sitting there in the cage, don't any skill to chap it. It doesn't seem to be a problem of tzeder at all. So, I mean, I don't have chickens, I never did, but I think it's like a very difficult thing to say that you have to that you're not allowed to open the coop and put in food. It's like they're sitting there, eingelegt after. Why are you saying there's a problem of tzeder? At any rate, the Mr. Brewer does bring this earlier sefer, Shul Avram, but from Alter Rebbe, I didn't think it was necessary to be machmir. The Voero of the Frierdiker Rebbe. There is in the end of Mishnayos Be'er, it talks about domestic animals and wild animals, chayos baisios and chayos midborios. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says you have chassidim, and you don't hear them a whole year. So there's the Mishnah, who's called a domestic animal? Which animal is called domestic? One says they come in the evening. In the day, the dreinzach. In the evening, they come. The other one says the whole summer they're running around wild. Comes the winter, they'll come to the barn, to their owner. They are also called domestic. So the Rebbe said, you've got a Zocher Chassidim who a whole day they're running around. When they have a problem, they know the address. They know which door to knock on when they have a problem. So when it's by day, then hefker. It comes night, and they need to have a bit of shelter. They need to have a brocho. They need to have a shiur. They know which door to knock. They're also called domestic animals. So he says they have an echet chassidim. That's that's the word of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Okay, let me clarify. So about there's something about the Rabbi Yazov is adding on the chat about the liver. Some say that there's a difference of kashrut within 3 days or after 3 days. I don't think that's a nefkamina for this Chabad Chumrah about the 3-day business. I don't think so. Mr. Beria is asking about chopped liver. No, chopped liver is perfectly okay. What we're saying is we don't take the liver after it's been roasted. We don't then fry it or cook it. But in its chopped form, if it's in its form without reheating it, without just chopping it and eating, that's perfectly okay. Yeah, my understanding is even if it was cast within the 3 days, it still would be this chumrah of not cooking it. Right, now then someone's asking, are dogs muksa? So bichlal, as you see in the halacha, it says here that a domestic animal is considered muksa, even though it's a chicken in the farmyard. And what I would want to share with you, though, that there are poskim, which is negia mol definitely little mekel zayin to turn a blind eye. There are poskim who say, contemporary poskim who say that pet dogs, pet cats, etc., that they're not muksa because it's not like an animal which you're keeping for, having for supper one day or for having for breeding. It's an animal which is kept for entertainment. So there are poskim who do allow that pets would not be muksa. So those who are mekel yeshal hem malismech. The page in the book of Rav Ringlas is page 417. Right. So about frying with onion, yes, that's we would Chabad minute would be not to fry liver with anything. We wouldn't put it back to the heat again with any liquid or anything. Okay. Now, the next thing that you have on the list is about, in some circles, shlishi is seen as a special aliyah. So now the question is it because it's the third aliyah, or is it because it's the first one after the Kohen and the Levi? And nafkamina is, if there's no Kohen, Rabbi Reuven Kohen, you've never seen how it happens when there's no Kohen there, right? Unless you were before your bar mitzvah.
There was a story that with Rabbi Levin.
Okay.
I don't remember all the details. Something to the effect that he had seen it happen. There was no Levi in Shul.
Okay. All right.
The answer was before his bar mitzvah.
Okay. So there's no Kohen. So is the Shlishi the privilege or the Sheni the privilege? Now I want to say, Rabbi Lu is online, and I once heard from Rabbi Lu. I asked him, "Are you makpid on this?" So he says, "Since I joined Lubavitch, the term makpid is out of my vocabulary. I don't have the word makpid." I also want to say that the whole business shlishi, shishi in Lubavitch, but it's not a currency in Lubavitch. Their cover, the rest of the cover, is not really spoken about so much. I'm not Yodea Machshavas, but I'm just talking about. And I also want to share with you before answering this halacha, a reiche word of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Epis, he said, in reference to people being so concerned about Kavod HaTorah, he says, I'm going to say the Lashon in Yiddish and then in English. It's a disgrace for the honor of the Torah that a Talmud Chochem is so obsessed about Kavod HaTorah. Yeah, the Rebbe was concerned that the people should give the due recognition to the Rov, that they didn't give him the appropriate. I think it was about the Chazak, I think it was. But fine. Hakoponim. Let's look at Megila, and we're looking now in the Gemara where this is discussed is actually in Perik in Gittin. It talks about a bunch of things done with Dipnei Shalom, and it talks about the aliyahs. Very interesting. The Chachamim saw the wisdom, in their wisdom, saw not to do Kriyas HaTorah like Megillah, the whole lot in one go. No, there have to be 7 honorees, and there's going to be a Maisim covered for them and covered for Yenim. There's going to be this issue. But they saw there was a need to give cover to people. Fine. Okay, so in the Shulchan in Gemara and Shulchan it says on Shabbos and Yom Kippur, after Levi you give Tamid Chachamim, and then you give them Amunim Alat Tzibur, Tamid Chachamim, and it's a kind of the whole hierarchy. So I guess some people will never get an aliyah somehow. Okay, let's go on to the other side. I remember, I was once, years ago, I was in Haifa for a Shabbos. I had a guest who once stayed in my house, page 417, not 470. I had once a Litvish Rov, he stayed in my house, and we were in Eretz Yisrael, so we stayed with him. And he's, a small shul, 30 people, whatever. Welche aliyah darfst du haben? Was it shlishi, shishi? I didn't know what he was talking about. Whatever you give me is fine. Okay. So then we said you have here the Alpi Nigla, and then we have, this is from Kafachai. V'omnom ho'arizal b'shar hakavonis nosan tam b'soid. The Arizal in the Sefer Shar HaKavonis gives the explanation of the aliyahs. You got 7 aliyahs corresponding to the 7 spheres. Kohen is Chesed, Levi is Gvura, Yisrael is Tiferes, Revi is Netzach, Hamishi is Harid, Shishi is Yesoid, Shvi is Malchus. And then I'm skipping a bit. Then you see that the choice aliyah in Kabbalah is Shishi, corresponding to Yesoid, and in the Zohar, where's the Zohar? It's I don't remember now. I saw it inside. The Rebbe Krispedoi, he would have the aliyah for Shishi. About it, then he says, "V'acharov b'madrega uz shlishi." So the mile of shlishi al pi Kabbalah is it's midas hatiferes. So the answer to the question, whether if there's no kohen and therefore Levi has rishon, whether shlishi is the privilege or sheni is the privilege, is al pi niglo to al pi Kabbalah. Al pi Kabbalah shlishi is the midas hatiferes, remains the privileged position. Let's go further. The next question, which was on our list, was someone's asking, as an alternative to a crock pot, may one put a fully cooked and hot cholent in a roaster bag and place in a pan of hot water and leave on a hot plate? So have a bag and put the bag with the stuff into a pot. So we've gone through this already a few months ago. We were talking about the sous vide. I mean, it was the first concern, a problem of hatmona. And then the maskana was, later someone pointed out that the Alter Rebbe says that there's no problem of hatmona in clear water. So therefore, you have a pot and there's clear water, you put the bag of cholent. So we wouldn't call that a problem of atmona because the water outside is see-through, and therefore it's not a problem of atmona. Let's move on. Oh, now here's a wichtige Shaila. These are all Meise Shehoya. The Meise Shehoya this is a Shaila which I got from France, and a woman had a hergish, she's going to give a large amount of tzedakah. And she had in mind, she's going to give it in 3 installments. And she had a particular institution in mind. And she gave the first installment. And the director, in his wisdom, was rude to her to the point that she was so put off that she doesn't want to see him again. And she doesn't want to give her donation, the next 2 installments, she doesn't want to give that. But she wants to keep her now she's asking, let's say it was an orphanage, very very worthy institution. But can she give it instead of this orphanage where there was this nasty fellow, to give it to a different orphanage? And the funny thing is, she hadn't said anything. There was no verbal commitment. So now, generally, about Nedorim, a neder is something which you express, a vow. Ishki yafli lindoy neder. When it comes to tzedakah, there is a reason to actually be machmir, even if you had made a resolve b'machshava. And that's why I wanted to share it. I don't think we're going to have too many people having the actual shaila, but the idea of tzedakah b'machshava. And this is the Ramo in Siman Reish Nun Ches. I think it's Sif Yud Gimel in Yerdadeya. Hilchos Tzedakah is in Yerdadeya, Siman Reish Nun Ches. He says the Ramo the following: Im choshav b'liboy litein ezer lo'dava litztok. If you had come to made a thought, but in other words, not a fleeting thought, but there had been a resolve. I believe that's the parameter. He had made a resolve to give an amount to tzedakah. Chayiv l'kayim machshavtoi. Then you have a chiyuv, the obligation to fulfill your mental resolve. V'ein tzorich amira. It doesn't matter whether you did utter or not. The fact that you made that resolve. Elodim omar koifen oisilekayim. If a person had expressed his intention, then he could be coerced to honor his vow. Obviously, if he just thought, no one else would know that he had the thought. But let's say somehow he did share that he had a thought. Anyway, what we're seeing here is a vow which has been uttered. Then the Beis Din would have if they had the means, they would force the person to honor it. But here, it was a machshava. It still remains. He's got the option. He can't be forced. Then the Ramo says, "Yesh oimrim dim lo hoitzi befiv enikol." Others say it's just a thought, doesn't count. The main opinion is like the first svara, and therefore coming back to this woman who made a resolve. So then the halacha is that you do have to. She does have a chiyuv to honor her. She has to honor her vow, even though it's a vow b'machshav. The question is she allowed to switch from one tzedakah to another? So this is what we're reading now. On the second side of the screen is a quote from the Sefer Tzedakah Mishpat from Rabbi Yankel Bloy. So he's produced such tremendous forum on subjects. He's got 7 forum on Chesed Mishpat. On Ribis, he's got a volume Bris which is a pioneer. He's got the Sefer Chayves Hador. He's got a Sefer on Shatnez. He's got a Sefer on Chinuch. So Tzedakah Mishpat is his treatise to the Hilchos Tzedakah. So he quotes from the Sefer Beis Yitzchok. That was the Rov of Lvov, Yitzchok Shmelkus. Even according to the one who says neder b'machshava is a neder, but it's not mamish k'amira, because shebe'amira zocha ha'hektish. When you had made a vow verbally, it's as if the asset had been transferred to the ownership of hektish. Therefore, you cannot retract at all. Aval b'machshava loy zocha. But just when you had a thought, yes, there's a commitment, but it doesn't mean there's a transfer of ownership. She An utterance of a vow of tzedakah is as if you'd actually handed it over from man to man in dinner moments. It is a commitment, but it's not as if you're transferred. If it had been, he transferred it. It's as if it's already in the account of that orphanage. He cannot now transfer it to another orphanage. It's already owned by them. That's if it were b'dibur. But since it was b'machshava, there's an obligation to honor that commitment, but one does retain the right to switch the benefit from one beneficiary to another. So those. Just when you get a donation, there might be another one coming. So we treat them nicely. Right. Our last question, which we have on the list today. Yeah. So this is behemshich to last week, and I think it's on the line. One of our listeners had asked that he had missed getting an aliyah the Shabbos before the yahrzeit, and so he's asking whether there's an inyan to have an aliyah on the Shabbos after the yahrzeit.
Yahrzeit or birthday?
The question was about a yahrzeit, but I think we can learn from one to the other. There's an expression, bol lamed v'nimtza lamed, that you think you're teaching, and actually you pick up things which you didn't expect. And you have a loshem talmida yosem mikulam. And in the Maimer for Yud Shvat Tovshin Chof Aleph, which we're learning this year, because Kesher to Yud Shvat, it has the Nagad Shmo v'Avad Shmei. Sometimes through publicity, sometimes you kind of get a bit eroded because of a publicity. But what happened here, this shiur goes on anash.org. And one of the listeners wrote on that, her name is Cyril Lipsker, I believe that's Rabbi Vremel Lipsker's wife. And she said that the Beryl Baumgarten, who was her father, had a hero from the Rebbe about this. So I contacted one of our listeners, a shliach in France. His wife is an called Rebel Baumgarten, and he's put together a biography of Rebel. I said, "Can you fill me in on this?" So he shared with me Rebel Baumgarten's diary, which he's published already. That's the Einikel is published. And this is from Yechidus. I think it was Monday night. Chof Dalet Menachem of Tovshin Yod Dalet. And his birthday was the following day, Chof Hei Menachem of, which was a Tuesday, obviously. And so the Rebbe asks him, Wegen Yemoledes, Hotir Shabbos, it's not on the Rebbe's ear. Did you have an aliyah? Hotir Eile given. Did you have an aliyah the past Shabbos? So Rebel says, "No, I didn't." So the Rebbe says to him, "Farvos, why didn't you have an aliyah? Ich habe gemeint, dass alle Wesen schon meine Tier. I thought that everyone knows my inclination that the Shabbos before Yom Moledes you should have an aliyah." Beryl says to the Rebbe, "Ich habe nicht gewusst." He didn't know that it was important to have an aliyah the Shabbos before your birthday. Okay. So the Rebbe answers him back. Kann man das öfter Masaken sein durch Eule sein morgen? I don't know why morgen. It doesn't make sense. It was a Tuesday. So, I don't know. No,
morgen is Monday.
So this was with Sunday night.
Sunday night, Yechidus. Sunday night, okay. Yes.
Sunday. Okay. Okay. I actually checked it up. You might be right. Kann man doch mal öfter Masaken sein, Eule sein morgen? Then the Rebbe says, no morgen kann man Tag Eule sein. Aber Montag is nicht der Ende von Shabbos. So although you'll have an aliyah the following day, but it's not the same as Shabbos. Das darf ihr tun. This is what you should do. Ihr darft morgen Eule sein. Tomorrow you have an aliyah. Und euch beten, am soll Shabbos geben an aliyah. And the following Shabbos should also get an aliyah. Should ask for getting aliyah the following Shabbos. So so that's what I'm saying. Bola lamed lim salamed. I thought the Shabbos after yahrzeit. I don't think there's a difference whether it's a Shabbos after Yom Haledes, Shabbos after. Of course, there's a difference in years, but I'm talking about in Inyan. I don't think there's any difference. The Shabbos Danoch, if you didn't manage to get the Shabbos before, to get the Shabbos after. Well, that would be a birthday, and I would imagine if it was missed your side, to have the Shabbos after. I just want to share with you one last Bekeshel Azeh. After the Rebbe had the heart attack in Tangedacht in Tovshin Lamed Ches. So then, gradually, the Rebbe started making the Farbrengens. First, the Farbrengens were Motzei Shabbos, and gradually started introducing the, the unscheduled Farbrengens were restored on Shabbos, and eventually, Tovshin Mem then became known that the Rebbe is going to make the Shabbos Mevorchim Shabbos also going to be back on Shabbos. I remember this because I was going on my Shlichus to Australia, and I stopped in London for about 6 hours, and Rabbi Luzer's Eingesund was upset that the Rebbe was taking the Farbrengens, which now, until then, they had every Shabbos Mevorchim, they could hear the Farbrengen and the shiur. Now it's going to be back on Shabbos. So Rabbi Lu was thinking of making a petition as Obleiben the Farbrengens Obleiben Motzei Shabbos. Al Kaponim, the Rebbe didn't accept this. And now I heard at the time, one of the doctors was talking with the Rebbe, and they were looking for ways to make the Rebbe, to make it less stressful, to make it easier for the Rebbe to he was speaking without a microphone, so it was like a stress to be able to project the voice so much. With a microphone, make life easier. So they asked the Rebbe whether they can kind of make it, the schedule will be that the Farbrengen will be on Motzei Shabbos and doesn't have to be put back on Shabbos. So the Rebbe says, no, that's communist. That's not negotiable. And the Rebbe says, Shabbos, is there Olam Hecher? Perhaps the words are not mamish the words, but Be'erech. Shabbos, the people are inspired, and I am inspired, and I want to utilize. It's important for me to utilize the moment where they are inspired, and I am inspired to utilize the moment. Motzei Shabbos is not the same thing, and therefore the Rebbe insisted on bringing it back to Shabbos. So therefore, perhaps this Inyan, which the Rebbe is saying here in this Yechidus, is saying. Shabbos, having an Aliyah on the weekdays needs double Shabbos. Shabbos, and what we're seeing of the Chiddush, even though it's the Shabbos after the event, it still has the Inyan of Shabbos elevating, and therefore, when we be mishtadel to have Aliyah the Shabbos after. So I'll finish on that. Now someone writes to me, Rabbi Lu is writing that happened in Tovshin Chav Dalet. He had been stuck in the Detroit airport for Shabbos, and obviously they didn't have a minyan there. So the Rebbe said to get an Aliyah next Shabbos. The Rabbi Lu wrote to the Rebbe on the grounds that it was incredible. He's now saying about Tovshin Mem. There was incredible publicity. So everyone in Stamford Hill asked on Sunday, what did the Rebbe say on Shabbos? Und von deswegen says the Rebbe hat das zurückgestellt, Yom Ketikunom, and that was something which by the Rebbe was sacred. The Farbrengen Shabbos Mevorchim, Hero from the Friedrich Rebbe, it was by him was Choik V'Layaver, and therefore whatever. Berves. Lepoil, he put it back on Shabbos, and es ist gewesen a Sach Geschmack Shabbosim. I want to finish off. You know what? I want to finish off. One Shabbos, it was a winter Shabbos, and the Rebbe was Farbrengen and Sishin Givoren. It was well after the Shkia, and Rebel Eunuch went over to the Rebbe, and he whispered by the Rebbe that on the table there was a watch, a wristwatch, folded or flat. He whispered to the Rebbe at the Zeged state that the watch had stopped. It broke. It wasn't wound up properly, whatever. And the Rebbe says, whatever, with hand. And within 5 minutes, he wrapped up the Farbrengen. And we done Mincha and straight into Ma'ariv. The next week, the Farbrengen went even later. But Rabbi Lu, you wanted to say something?
Can I ask you? I wrote
it. I wrote it. I want to say that I had in mind the Rebbe's. I wrote this. I'm not Chas v'Sholom. I'm sure people around the world must have written. I said that around the world, there's thousands and thousands of people hearing, and they're telling it over to 10,000. Yeah. But really, the Rebbe knows the Rebbe, and that Inyan came a few years later, or shortly later, when they started Teuchen Kotzer, which publicized about the Farbrengen. I really had in mind the Rebbe's Gesund, but I just asked him for the sake of Hafotzes Hamayonis.
The story that you said was with Dr. Resnick, and Dr. Resnick asked the Rebbe, because in those Farbrengens Motzei Shabbos, most of the times the Rebbe would say Mitzad Siba or Mitzad Sibis Shenis Farbrengen Noch Shabbos. So he says that it seems that the Rebbe is really not happy. He's hesitant that the Farbrengen has to be Motzei Shabbos. And he asked why. Motzei Shabbos is a microphone. Motzei Shabbos, it's easier for the Chassidim. They don't have to squash. It's easier. You can hear the whole world. So the Rebbe answered him, told him in English that the Farbrengen on Shabbos, I elevate the people or the Chassidim, and the Chassidim elevate me. Okay. That can't happen after Shabbos. That's something special about Shabbos.
All right.
But Nagedet Stocker is a Keilim koina. It is the Pushka koina.